And I'll open for questions and comments. Oh, this picture I'll just is from one of the communities I visited. Someone has just brought in some fish, and this is a little informal marketplace at an island. So the people have come to buy fish from these fishermen.
Excuse me. I have a question. My question is, you mentioned about the community fisheries where they use large nets. The whole community comes out and takes the fish out of the sea. Is that type sustainable in terms of the fish stock? Thank you.
This is the community fishing is different from these are just one-off incidents where suddenly a large school of mature fish will come to the island, maybe to the lagoon, or just even a little bit outside the reef. It is I'm not very familiar with the local, but I think it's Rodulung. Where so sometimes some of the descriptions I've read about people going on in boats and bringing the fish in, and there will be some people surrounding and directing the fish towards the shallow end, and when the fish comes to the shallow end, they will catch it using the nets. So this is not fish that stay there for a long time. This is opportunistic foraging more. While it's there, people are gathering, and so this is a little bit different from sustainably using. So these are one-off incidences which may occur once a year, maybe once in 2-3 years. So in these instances, I also found that they were opportunistically harvesting that fish and catching it. Well, I wasn't. The question was about coral bleaching, if the communities were observing, and I think I wasn't specifically asking about coral bleaching. I think the last significant coral bleaching occurred in 1998 with the 1998 El Nino, and many of the reefs were recovering, and I was focusing on the house reef. But it's interesting, some of the elders, because I was to them about better management and about coral reefs, they were talking to me about how people in the environment ministry or other governments come and talk to them about coral bleaching and things like that, and and about throwing waste and things like this, but they don't see the observations are not matching from what they are saying. One of the person, I'll talk about that a little bit, but the person who actually talked to me about coral bleaching said he was finding that after the coral bleaching incident, the coral was growing much better. I don't know if this is the scientific explanations, or is it more of an exaggeration from his side? I can't verify. And he was saying that it was quite huge growth patterns after the bleaching.
Your research was mainly about how the local communities valued the reefs. My question is, after this research, did you reach the conclusion that the Maldivians do value their reefs?
Oh, that's something I hadn't thought about in a whole. But yes, I think we do value our reef resources different. And I started at the beginning that in defining values are pluralistic. There are many, and we have values, but it's just changing depending on the situation. How we value a resource in one situation may be different to how we value it in another situation. But we value it, and it's based on our interactions with the resource as well as with other social the people in the community. That brings, and yes, I think because even within the generations, in the example of the fish and the coral, there is a type of value that they hold for caring about nature, but it's different depending on the generation, your worldviews, and it's very, very hard to say. That's why I have used a qualitative approach, because I don't think it's difficult to say this is the value. How much do you value can't be quantified, but there is value.
If a person has to give value to anything, maybe a corals or any natural thing, he has to know, he must have enough knowledge about that. So as a teacher, the student, if they have to give the value, they should know about the corals. So the school is the right place to learn about the coral reefs. But nowadays, unfortunately, in the Maldives, the enrollment rate in the school, I mean the students who are choosing the marine science or fishery science, the rate or the number is decreasing year by year, very drastically decreasing. So in this tragic situation, how can we give the value to the corals or the natural environment? So at the policy level or the ministry level, the people have to take measurements to increase or to encourage the future generation to choose this type of subjects which are related to the environment. Then definitely the future generation will give enough value to the environment or coral reefs. That is my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. And that's something we've been talking, the Faculty of Science Dean and some other colleagues, that it's a concern for us that students are now not taking up the science stream as much, and it is important to take. But on the other hand, even not just the science, but within the other areas, we could incorporate some of the local knowledge in some little ways. So not just changing to the science stream, but which is very, very needed, but it's important in other areas. Even when we are learning our local language, say, there could be some stories about coral reefs and the local stories they have about the fishing, and more practical, like the rituals which were practiced before, which are now people think rituals are more superstition and more. So those things can be incorporated into drama, perhaps. So there's ways we could even now try and make some changes. But I do agree with you.
Yes. You mentioned that it is difficult to assign a dollar value to these coral reef resources, but wouldn't it be very useful in impact assessment of EIS and all those kind of things, rather than just saying people value this qualitative data? I think it would be useful. And my actual question is, throughout your research, have you seen any articles or papers that have tried to value the economic value of the coral reefs in Maldives specifically?
Yes. As I started my initial work in valuing coral reefs was quantitative. I was looking at economic valuation only, and I had looked at there are many research papers on total concepts of total economic valuation, which try to capture a dollar value. And while it is done and it is needed, I'm not totally saying the only way is qualitative. When there are instances where at least some approximation of a quantitative value is important, especially in decision making and policy making. So it is important, it is part of learning about valuing, but this is focused on more on my critique that total economic valuation concept, you cannot cover and give a total. So that's my critique of the total economic valuation concept, and especially when looking at communities, people, when we ask people how they can value it. So there's different ways you can interpret. Say, for example, the toshi, the house reef surrounding the coral reef. You can put a value to that by looking at the construction, how much did it cost to, if you say did not have that toshi and you wanted to put replace with an artificial structure, an artificial reef, what would be the cost of including putting up this structure? So there's one way you can capture that protection function. So there are ways, and I am not saying I don't support those. Where appropriate, this can be taken. But as a whole, at a more philosophical level, the value, you cannot put a dollar value.
Thank you.
Migration ಗೆ local knowledge ಗೆ ವಾಹಕ ಎಕ್ಕೊ ದೆಕ್ಕಿರ್ಗ ವರ ಬೊಡ ಕೊಮ್ಮಸ್ಕೊತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಗುಳೆ ದೇತದೈ komme saw mara gina saw ba he dikken kan emena singe ta do migrate wanje heni emi migrate wumuga ane local knowledge ke amel environment ke wara bodu bay du kollafa mi annanje heni do ehen asa inna komme ska central system ege teren kiyawa deruga mi innani local knowledge wara boda beenu natifa hemwen kannenge do ane mi beeruge තිබුණා global view කාල් ගොතක ඒති කියවා දෙ ෆින්නන් දැන් මම හිතරියානේ කුරි ගානේ අඩුග කන්නගෙන local knowledge ගේ study යෙන් දුෂින්තා මේ ඩොක්ටර් ශීමා සයිද් කියා මේ කදාෆේ ඒක හුට්ටෙන් නොඳ වරබ්බඩ මේ කුරිගේ stories තක බන්දික හලෙච්චිහින් ඒති කවානේ environment livelihood ගුලි ෆොහොන්නගේ කව මගේස් වරබ්බඩ interesting හොරේ එච්ච හැම හිතරියානේ මිස්නාගේ study ጋ local knowledge ekkur kihawarkan ekala echi evvito noni
okay me English undinas jawab me beru mihestiviya okay, her question was about local knowledge migration and how this is taking a bit of local knowledge. So how much I had looked into local knowledge in my research. Actually, the study mentioned Shima's, I had referred to a lot to her work was local ways of knowing. That's her research. So what she was looking at the oral tradition, storytelling, and how traditional ways of knowing can be incorporated into our current schools. And in my work, I had referred a lot to Shima's work and supported her claims that we should not negate our local worldviews for our global worldviews, and how I had written in more detail than I had explained about how we can, by referring to her work, how we can actually integrate it into our current schools. And like you said, we migrate for very important reasons, which and we leave behind our natural environment. But we can, as Shima has in her thesis shown, there are ways you can integrate the local knowledge, the local stories into our education. So does that answer your question? Or
I also wanted to know if during the interviews you had with people and the people you met in the 7 islands you visited, if you were able to, if they told you about any stories from long ago, songs.
Yes, actually, that was one of the interesting, a few stories which were related to the local environment, how they use resources. One which was, I have used a few, some from Shima's as well, but one which I came across was the story of how the skipjack tuna was formed. Do you know that story? So skipjack tuna is tuna on the sides, it has 5 lines. So this story actually, I spoke to many people who knew bits of the story. There wasn't one person who could tell the whole story. So that's one important thing. We need to think of ways to collect these stories. But from listening to different people, I have written somewhat to my understanding what the story was. So this was a little girl. There was some disputes on who this girl was in the different versions of the story, but to my mind she is the daughter of one of the higher people, maybe an island chief or one of the elders. So she made out of dough a fish. And when she showed it to her father, he said that you shouldn't make us this out of like living things, that it should not be made these sculptures. So she was asked to destroy it. So instead she lets it go into water, and as she puts it in the water, the fish comes to life and leaves her hand, and it's because it's her five fingers, it seems, are the marks on the skipjack today. And in this story, she asks the skipjack, the tuna is very thankful to her, and then she says, I can't remember the exact, but you can read it. I can email you the story, but she says, my people are very poor, so can you go and multiply in the oceans, and then can my people catch your offspring for food? And the fish actually speaks and says, I am a very proud fish, so he's very high, and so could you use golden lines, poles to catch me? So it's appropriate for my splendor, my grandness. And the girl says that the people are very poor, so they can't afford it. And so the skipjack says, so can you use silver instead? But the people, she replies, still cannot afford it. So the tuna says, you can just use the pole, the bamboo type, the onu, and I think they use waka, the bark, to make the line thread, and an ordinary hook. So, and the girl says, yes, my people can afford that. And so the tuna replies, now this is very embarrassing to be seen, to be seen, to be caught in this humble, very poor thing. So he says, when you do catch me, can you splash water so other fish can't see my face? And this was so interesting to me. It really clearly explains how fish is caught today, using the pole and line and the spraying of water. And I was interested also in exploring how the beliefs in other indigenous cultures had about animism, about how animals can talk to you, and in some of the I can't remember the community of I can't remember the name of these communities, but they had a belief that the deer, when the people go hunting, the deer actually give themselves as gifts to the hunter, and there is to some extent, I think our ancestors had these beliefs about animism. So this was a very interesting source, one of the most interesting stories I came across in the research. So there are a lot of, the stories hold a lot of information about how we interact with our resources. So anybody here who heard that story before? I'm still looking for someone who can tell me the whole story in one piece, and haven't found someone. And the story I just told is taken from bits I heard from different people. So we'll conclude if there isn't any more questions. And if you are interested in to have a look at my thesis, it can be seen from the university library. So if you look up Mizna Mohamed or valuing reef resources, I think the title was Changing Reef Values. It started. So thank you for coming and listening to the talk.